Is it zombies?
What was it like to have a goal in life? It's all too easy to talk about having something to shoot for, something to aim at and hope beyond all wishes to attain. But the more I thought about it, the more I began to realize just how long that path was going to have to be. Did I want my freedom? Of course. But I wasn't sure anymore on exactly how. Not after speaking with Protégé about what I truly understood or not about the risks. That great outside world, if I went out into it with the same naivety I had shown, could have had a very short and brutal end for all I knew. Did I just want to escape the pain? My mindset had led me to consider this route in the wrong way one too many times before, and the risk of falling into that again never really went away. When no exit was given, I found myself more and more beginning to turn to options that I would normally never consider. Some risky, some very final. I had come too close to that once already. Was it to discover those who would care for me as much as I wanted to care in return? But then, who truly would? Pegasi were hated in Philadelphia, and I certainly wasn't the most charismatic and confident pony who ever lived. If asked my name by someone I didn't know, chances are I'd just squeak and avoid eye contact. I didn't know what I really wanted, but the thought of going beyond the wall was the sole remaining thing that kept me from going mad with grief at the situation I had been dealt now. But after meeting Brimstone, Glimmerlight, and Protégé, things had been changed. Now, I had been given two paths to trot down. One, a lifeline tenuous and vague, but a desperate hope all the same, to save Glimmerlight, and pray that she agreed to help me in the escape. Her brief words gave me reason to believe that this was worth trying for at the very least. It was a risky endeavor, but the chance to attain the aid of some pony else would go a long way towards a successful attempt. On the other hoof, there was Protégé's offer. 2 years' service and danger in exchange for my eventual freedom. The callousness he showed to even smile as he signed me on to this operation spoke volumes of the reasons behind my shaky trust of that pony. Good intentions and a supposedly caring mindset mattered little when he was still the pony holding me against my will and forcing me into dangerous situations. All the same, somehow I couldn't shake the feeling that he understood me better than any pony else. If Brimstone and Glimmerlight cast me out, he would be my only vague ally left in the nightmare that was Philadelphia. The momentum from seeing the stable dwellers escape was beginning to falter over time. I desperately needed a figurehead, some pony to give me a reason. Perhaps that's why I was following a raider, who had once abused ponies like me for fun, in an effort to just be doing something. Anything at all, to chase some way to get my escape back on track. Was it because I craved to break the loneliness? Or was it just because he had the authority that I couldn't say no to? My duality of personality was still a tough obstacle in my head, dredged up all over again after the master had set himself upon me. I really wished I had something better to hang on to. I only had to take care of myself in the past, to survive, to get my journal back, to attempt escape. I'd gained a certain confidence that the master had broken once more. I needed it back. I needed something to prove to myself that I could still do this sort of thing, and not go back to being the mindless slave I once was. I needed to save Glimmerlight, not just for her life, not just for the vague wish she would become an ally, but also to give me something to cling to, something that I could use to remind myself that I was not beaten yet. It wasn't much of a goal, but for now, as I set myself upon the longer road, it was enough to get started. Hearts and Hooves Hospital had clearly seen better days. The building was old, sandstone and brickwork, mismatched from different generations of renovation, and surrounded by a ripped and wrecked barbed fence of the war era. On top of it all, wasteland-style scrap and rough repair jobs had further broken the balance of visual appeal. It offended every artistic sense I had to merely even look at the sprawling complex's low buildings that seemed to expand outward rather than upwards, around the higher central wards. Old wagons lay on their side, their pink and yellow design marred and dust-covered. I could see at least a dozen of them, prompting me to wonder why they hadn't been renovated for use by Red-Eye, A closer look explained why. They were sky wagons. Without Pegasi, they were useless to him. I had occasionally seen griffins with similar carts, but these were much too small for those towering mercenaries. But even they had been stripped of anything useful, owing to Red Eye's insistence to use anything and everything. That same ruthless mindset had created Philadelphia and repaired much of what it could do. Before me sat another element of proof to that claim. The hospital was not exactly bustling, but I could see lights inside. Slaves were on duty outside. I presumed a medical area dedicated to more important slaves didn't warrant a full guard routine. I could hear the hum of arcane science from healers doing their work within. Brimstone and I had been holed up within a warehouse across from the hospital for an uncomfortably long time now already. I had taken to looking around with observation to try and stop my mind from wandering to the recent events with the Master. For some time, I did take to trying to guess the ages of the houses around us. Some were similar to one another and made of what looked like modular components. They were almost bare, but for identical fences, or at least where identical fences would have been. The wood had either rotted away or been taken off by the industry. Yet others, as I looked closer, broke the monotony. Broken timber and fine brickwork had become stained, but I saw brighter colors dashed away here and there. Porches hung over verandas, rather than the flat doors the newer buildings had. Carvings and elaborate shapes gave them life and personality. They were all different. It occurred to me that I was seeing the divide between wartime and pre-war in the very houses that the ponies lived in. As I looked closer, I could see the newer ones were often wedged between the older ones, as though cramming more ponies into the same city space. Unfortunately, as much as the history from observation occupied my mind, it didn't really hold my attention for long from the limited amount I could see from my hiding spot. Dropping from the ledge with a sigh, I found my companion not faring any better. The big stallion was pacing and tapping rocks incessantly. He had said patience wasn't his strong point, and this was only proving it. As such, I'd decided to try conversation and found myself met with a surprisingly amiable response on various topics. For example, now I knew the best way to break a pony's leg was to buck it just above the kneecap, and that apparently swearing was a subject I was most uneducated in.
So, what you're telling me,
rumbled Brimstone,
is that you've never said fuck in your life. Never.
He seemed almost shocked to meet a pony who just didn't swear. Brimstone scared the life out of me with almost every movement he made, and social interaction on a conversational level was clearly about as new to him as it was to me in many ways. Throughout speaking, I had always seen that glint in his eye whenever I began saying anything that offended his survival of the fittest mindset. Well, I've thought it a few times.
But never just shouted it? What plane of innocence are you from that you've never given out a right good swear? Aye, we're going to change that. Go on.
I sat up. What was he asking me? I blurted out an answer without too much thought. Go on? What? I don't get you. Brimstone sighed, and shifted his weight to lie on the other side in our secluded little hiding spot I'd found. I'd felt so proud when he'd nodded in appreciation at it.
Say it. Can't have a midget like you unable to swear properly when the world decides to fuck him up.
I rubbed my hooves against one another. I'm not really sure I want to.
Try.
Please,
Just give it a go. We're bored here anyway. Amuse me.
My jaw was hanging open. I'd always felt nervous when I'd even thought the word. Or any swear word for that matter. My mother had always taught me not to. That to swear or curse in the goddess's name was bad. Over time, I'd broken the second one a few times. Sorry, please don't send me to the moon. But always kept control of my voice. But then, perhaps I'd fit in better if I talked like them? Okay, I'll try?
Aye.
Alright, what about? Brimstone rolled his eyes, muttering something about bloody sunlickers, and shrugged.
Anything. Something you don't feel good about. Who do you really not feel safe around?
My first thought was, you! But I doubted it would help my present situation of being on the better side of this massive and potentially dangerous pony. I still remembered him choking me against the wall for daring suggest the wrong thing about him. But who did I hate? Wicked Slit was a particularly loathsome presence in Philadelphia, as was Sooty Morris, and of course Noose. I hated Protégé for his insistence to not let me go. I hated Red-Eye for buying me in the first place and putting me into this nightmare. But really, there was always going to be one answer. I really hate the Master.
Shackles. Piss pot of nasty that bastard is. See? Now you try. Say you fucking hate him or something.
I sat up and took a deep breath. Closing my eyes, I was actually shivering. What if he heard me? What if word got back to him? What if Celestia and Luna heard me? What if Brimstone laughed at how bad I was at proper swearing? Really, they paled in comparison to the real worry. What if some pony told my mother? I could do this. I could rebel a little. Show the Master he couldn't take my freedom of voice. I felt my face screw up and the word fall flat suddenly. Brimstone just shook his head.
What is wrong with you? It's just a wee word. Nothing to get worried over. Try again.
No! I wasn't going to give up. I'm doing it now. I really fudging hate him! There was a dull thunk as Brimstone face hoofed. Hard.
This could take some time, couldn't it?
I just nodded meekly, muttering small apologies under my breath. However, my ears perked up as I heard a sound from outside, the sound we'd been waiting for. Noticing me perk up, Brimstone peered above the ruined windowsill.
Looks like a bit of waiting paid off. Guard change. New ones won't be as keen to do the night shift, so getting past them shouldn't be too hard. You distract one, and I'll take him out.
Wait, you're going to kill a slave?
Yes, and?
His eyes glanced over at little me, the small pony so pathetic that he couldn't even swear, as though asking wordlessly whether I really was as useless to him as I was seeming. But it slammed home again. He might act nicer sometimes, but when it came to saving the one he cared about, he would become the raider all over again to make it happen. Eventually, as I stared with a horrified look, he seemed to deflate slightly and shake his head.
You look just like her when you stare like that, you know. Fine. I'll try not to do it.
As we climbed down, I heard him muttering to himself about going far too soft around mares and little bucks. I clambered down as best I could on my injured shoulder before we began to creep toward the hospital itself. I wanted to help save a life with this, not end others. The slaves hated me for my wings, but I would be damned if I was going to hate them back for the same stupid reason.
I hadn't counted on them nailing the guards to the wall.
Brimstone had spotted something I had overlooked. The slaves were chained to the wall beside the door. Any knocked out or dead body would be out in the open and easily spotted, while they could never leave their posts, no matter what happened. I wonder if the Master had come up with that one for Red-Eye. It had his horrific practicality all over the concept. As such, the plan to use me to distract one before knocking them out had been thrown completely out the window, now that the guards could not leave their highly visible locations, where a body would be noticed within minutes. As we advanced and crouched behind the outer wall, we both looked around the corner. Brimstone normally, me crouched beneath him, and hunted for ways in. Brimstone Blitz nodded suddenly and lowered his voice.
Got a way in.
Where?
First floor. Pull across a wagon. I'll stand on it. Then you'll stand on my back. You'll have to do it alone now. But it's better than leaving an unconscious guard where they'll find it immediately. Just don't get stepped on.
My heart skipped a beat as the meaning of his words drove home. I'd have to sneak through a slave hospital run by, well, the slavers, and steal medicine with no backup inside? Also, what was with all the shortness quips? I wasn't that small. No pony messed with little Pip. I had heard so on the radio, and she was about the same height as me. I don't know if I can do this, Brim. How will I even know the medicine?
It's called Rad Purge. Some rare knockoff brand. but it's safe for Glimmer to use to avoid the ingredients in Radaway that she's allergic to. Just look for that.
But I backed off, looking to the side with a sigh. I really hated admitting this. I can't read.
Are you kidding me? Seriously, Merc? Are you kidding me? You're how old?
I didn't quite know, actually. Only a rough estimate. I didn't even know my birthday. Not that any pony truly knew dates outside of fancier settlements. Even then they differed. I just hung my head in embarrassment as Brimstone groaned and shook his head.
Damn it all. Look, it's like Radaway. You know what that looks like?
I nodded.
Right. Good. It's like that, but a much darker orange. Almost a brown. Alright?
Okay, that I could do. I nodded before glancing back round again. The sky wagon he intended to push up was nicely out of sight, but my nerves were still shot. Alone in Vince was one thing. Creeping past slavers? That hadn't ended well last time.
Come along, Merc. Just get started and you'll figure it out.
But I...
Wished.
Huh? What does that...
It means shut up. Now come on.
His voice held a tone of authority. I'd forgotten he had led others. I felt the slave in my mind bidden to obey the command as I trotted quietly after the big earth pony toward the wagon, wondering if I really was making this choice on my own, or if it was only because he was telling me to help him. Some days, I wished I could tell the difference of choice from obedience. Inside, I didn't find much I hadn't expected. There were wards with little cleanliness and rather disturbing traces of red stained into the floor. Slaves groaned from open wounds, while any pony with a degree of medical ability was moving around, checking the patients. Too many times I saw them sigh dejectedly and move on. Thankfully, no pony seemed to mind me being there amidst the strangely slow-paced yet chaotic scene of pain and half-hearted healing that took place around me. Even so, I quickly snatched up some bandages from an empty bedside and used them to cover my pit buck. It mostly looked like scrap, but there was no sense in taking the chance. Perhaps they might think I was injured and had a right to be here. The thought quickly occurred to me that I was injured. Just, I wasn't considered valuable enough to send to this place for treatment. I guess Protégé's admittedly appreciated efforts to protect me didn't extend to getting me on the list of valued slaves. Perhaps they just didn't like Pegasi. The corridors were of wooden construction, clearly very old. I could feel them creaking under my hooves. Indeed, some areas looked about ready to give way and fall. Whatever renovation efforts Red-Eye had made were clearly minimal in priority. How could slave marketeers like Sooty and Artery get away with having so much stock, and yet there was never enough for those here? It just wasn't fair. I passed a young earth pony buck about my age, teal and white. He whimpered on an old moldy mattress in the nearest ward. His 2 front legs were just gone. Had he stepped on a mine? I found myself standing and watching him for a second, just lying there crying into the mattress and trying to move legs that weren't there. Now he'd never walk again. The fate of the one poor slave that lost a leg to the thresher came back to my mind. Shuddering, I found myself forced to move on. There had to be a medicine cupboard somewhere. A sudden door banging and agonized screaming dragged me from my thoughts as I saw a stretcher magically pulled before me. Ducking into the ward to let them by, I squeaked and hid as I saw Whiplash following it at top speed.
"Don't you dare let her die! She's one of my best workers! Slit will have my ear if I can't get her on shifts in the future."
"Yes, master!" "Bloodbank, get to the stash and bring a brace with a syringe of Medex."
"Yes, doctor!"
Peeking out from the ward, I saw a light pink mare thrashing in pain on a stretcher, as 2 unicorns desperately tried to hold her down. I saw a red pony in a blood-stained overall gallop off down the hall, even as the stretcher and Whiplash disappeared around the corner. After all I'd been through, he really didn't seem too much of a threat these days. At a canter, I followed Bloodbank as the procession disappeared through another set of doors. Even further away, I could still pick up her squealing in the distance. The sound made my stomach churn, as it heightened when they undoubtedly began to work to fix whatever had happened to her. Bloodbank moved fast, charging around to a doorway. The fact he stopped to get a key was the only real reason I even caught up without moving too fast to seem overly suspicious. Even so, I nearly ran into a couple of orderlies magically carrying trays of implements, prompting some shouting to watch where the hell I was going, even as I hopped and wobbled out of their way. By the time I found him, he was coming out of the room once again and locking it once more. I felt the urge to say the word Brimstone had wanted, but at least now I knew where the medicine was kept. Waiting for Bloodbank to leave, I crept up the door, watching left and right for any pony coming. This was a more deserted area of the hospital, clearly to keep the chems away from those who might seek to acquire them from their beds. To an extent, I had to marvel at the organization for how little they had. These ponies were trying to help those brought to them. Bloodbank had looked concerned. Not for the first time. I wondered if casting Red-Eye and his forces as absolute monsters was a truly accurate conclusion. Perhaps the Master was just the exception? The others were harsh, yes, but... Shaking my head, I pushed on. This was no place to get involved with inner thoughts. I tried adjoining rooms, finding only some old bathrooms. Why I still felt guilty for glancing into the mayor's room by accident, I had no idea. And eventually, a less vital storage cupboard. With any luck, this might have what I needed. Stepping fully inside it and pulling the door closed behind me, I began to hunt around its contents from within. Metal boxes from the ever-rich designer were mixed with piles of old medical robes. Judging by the dust on it all, this hadn't been touched in quite a while. In fact, if I had been in this place more permanently, I may have made a hidey hole in here. The last item was a small toolbox. Out of curiosity, I opened it. Perhaps it'd have something to get that lock open? A hammer, small saw, nuts, bolts, metal ruler, truly a lethal weapon, wonder glue, a screwdriver, and some bobby pins. Nothing that could be used to pick a lock. I stifled a curse, or what amounted to a curse by my standards, and took just the ruler. It helped me make straight lines on my drawings, at least. I stuffed it into the pouch I'd sewn on the bottom of my fleece, and sat back against the wall to think. This just wasn't my area. Sure, I was a little thief. That I'd come to accept. But getting through obstacles was just beyond me. The mayor would probably have known how. She seemed intelligent. Brimstone would probably just knock and the door would open from sheer terror of the alternative. Protégé, well, he would just use the key. But for a little thief like Murky No. 7, like me, what could I do? Tossing ideas around, I gave up somewhere around hoping I had an undiscovered talent for making explosives out of wonder glue and lint, before realizing the obvious. I was a thief. There was a key. Well, duh. It took a few minutes to relocate Bloodbank as I followed the same wailing that still sounded through the hospital. I trotted through a cloth hung above the corridor and stopped. All this walking and running was not doing my shoulder any good at all. I wondered if they had any more medics in that cupboard. That had worked last time pretty nicely. Bloodbank was standing outside a room separated by a clear perspex viewing window. Behind it, I could see the mare thrashing as a unicorn tried to get the syringe of medics into her. I dared not look too closely. I didn't particularly want to see some gruesome injury to keep me up at night. Bloodbank's key was rather convenient, hanging from his side lapel for easy access with magic. However, even as I began to slowly approach, I could see how reflective the perspex was. Any attempt to sneak up and lift it would be spotted instantly. I tapped the goggles on my head while thinking. Bloodbank had acknowledged my presence with a brief glance, but seeing the bandage just grunted and looked back to what I guessed was the operating theater. "If you're a visitor for Petalleaf here, you'll have to wait." I spotted a quick chance and an idea. I couldn't sneak up on him, so I'd do the next best thing.
Petalleaf! Sweet Celestia, is she alright? Please! I have to see her!
I threw on my most dramatic and pained voice, letting my pitch go almost to breaking point as I galloped forward toward the window. Bloodbank sighed, turning to block my way. I said I am sorry, but you cannot... I tripped. Slamming into Bloodbank, the pair of us tumbled to the floor. I was given an unexpected lesson in swearing as he rose to his hooves and battered me around the head once or twice for acting so clumsy in a hospital. Shooing me out, I pretended to struggle and whine as I was almost thrown through the curtain again. With a final scream to never get in the way again, I was painfully half-bucked across the floor, groaning, clutching my side. I cowered into the corner of the reception as every pony else stared. But at least I had the key, hidden in my mouth from one pickpocketing little swipe. I was feeling at least moderately proud. I'd gotten in without harming any pony, and I could just leave the key behind the unlocked door when I left, so the doctors would still be able to access it and treat others. We'd save a life without hurting any pony. Well, almost. Flippybit's hatred still resounded in my mind. But that had been an accident, right? Brimstone would have let him go if he hadn't died in the doorway, right? Right? I knew I was wrong, but right now I needed to stay as optimistic as I could. I was trying to build confidence to pursue something bigger again. I couldn't afford to always second-guess myself. I was moving back toward the medicine cupboard again when I spotted another doctor leaving the room once more. I had to fight not to gasp as I galloped back to the last corner and hid behind it while he passed by. He was carrying just what I needed. Elation filled me as he left, and I galloped back to the door, unlocked it, and triumphantly ran in. This place definitely had the right stuff! It didn't. The shelves were stocked with pretty basic medicine in small doses. I guessed it was for quickly grabbing the amount they needed, separated into smaller amounts. I saw watered-down healing potions glittering with varied colors in the dark, and packs of tablets piled haphazardly together. An unusually large quantity of what looked like mouthwash was piled in a box on the floor, letting me stand on them to reach the higher shelves. To my disappointment, there was only a smattering of higher-end chems and medical supplies. Medics was stored in yellow locked boxes with clear plastic covers, while scant few packs of blood were held in a freezer unit running off a wire through the wall. Unfortunately, there was a clear gap beside the rat-away shelf where only one of the orange packets remained. Truth be told, I'd been planning to steal some more. They'd get restocked, right? But seeing the pitiful amounts, and remembering the suffering of slaves all around me, I couldn't. It would be as bad as becoming a slaver myself. The words of the first doctor came back to me. The medicine cupboard. Singular. This was the only one. There was no rad purge left. I'd failed Glimmerlight. I collapsed onto my knees in the middle of the cupboard, remembering her wonderfully peaceful and energetic look, even through her sickness. I realized just how much I'd wanted to meet this wonderful mare, who Brim had claimed didn't care what type of pony I was. But now she wasn't going to survive, because I couldn't figure out a damned lock fast enough to beat the last of the stock being taken. Unless... I turned back to the entranceway and hobbled out as fast I could. There was one more of them in the building, and I was going to get it no matter what. She deserved life. She didn't hate me. That rad whatever belonged to her. It had taken some searching, but eventually I located it. This run around the hospital had been beginning to annoy me, and a few orderlies were starting to get suspicious as well. I had tried the messenger trick again, but even then most of them kept glancing as I moved past. I avoided whoever I could, but no pony could truly hide in those well-lit corridors. It didn't matter. I had found the patient the medicine had been taken to. A nurse had been about to connect it, but one quick, crazed shouting from me later, they had galloped off, thinking they were urgently needed for an emergency. Now there was just me and the rad purge. That sickly brownish stuff lay on the side table, unconnected and fresh. All it would take is for one quick snatch, shove it in my pouch, and then make my way to the entrance and trot out. No pony would question some pony leaving. I felt my heart lift. I had done it! Reaching forward, I bit down on the rad purge. Who's there? I yelped and hopped back, holding the rad purge in my mouth, as I stared at the source of the noise. On the bed lay a mare covered by a thin blanket. She turned to me, eyes still closed from weakness. A sense of déjà vu flowed over me. The symptoms were precisely the same. The illness the same. This mare was suffering the exact same problem. She lay there, pale gray, with a wondrously colored blue, black, and white long mane tied into a ponytail, with 2 braided strands across her face. True to form, she was also a unicorn who looked a good bit older than me, like she could have been my mother. She was also very, very sick. Did you find some? I glanced at the mare, then down my own muzzle at the rad purge. They would get more, right? They would restock. I could just turn and walk away. Be a good little thief. Glimmerlight deserved it more than any pony. She looked so weak. My head lowered, feeling a shuddering start throughout my body already. Too late, I noticed my ears warning me of some pony approaching. "What are you doing?" Shocked, I squealed out loud and dropped the sachet before stumbling back and falling against the side of the bed, startling the mare. The nurse had returned and stood directly in the doorway, quite out of breath. Her coat and mane were blazing yellow and red, and her eyes were wide with surprise. Were you? Her eyes fell to the rad purge, before falling back to me. Having it all laid before me, I realized what I had truly been reduced to stealing from a critically injured pony with no proof of them being good or bad to help some pony else, to simply take the easy way out and lose all morals and ethics in the process. Not once had I even stopped to think and realize the path I had been walking down. Who was I to judge life against life? It quickly overcame me as I imagined my mother, the DJ, the mare, and even little Pip looking down on me disapprovingly. I collapsed to the floor in tears. "I'm sorry. I didn't. I needed. Words came with great difficulty as I cried my heart out, partially because of the overwhelming guilt, and partially from the terrifying thought that Philadelphia was slowly but surely beginning to push me to do this sort of thing. Yet, no matter how hard the world said I had to push to make it out of here, no matter of how Protégé spoke of how I had to be willing to do anything to get out of here, no matter how much this city spoke of sacrifice for freedom, I knew something else. That even if it made it harder, I still had my own way, my way, that mattered to me. And this was not it. The nurse picked up the sachet from the floor with her telekinesis, placing it beside the bed and frankly stunned mare. The sick patient wasn't sitting up to look down at me, being too weak, but the nurse advanced across to me. Her expression seemed to have softened. "You were going to take it, but this patient will die by tomorrow without this last sachet. She has an allergy. I know." I sniffed. "But some pony else does too. But I don't think she'll be able to come here. I just wanted to help her." Her face dropped any remaining sternness it had possessed as she drew breath lightly. Her horn flickered over me. "I can see you have an irradiated lung infection. A serious one. This isn't for that? Look me in the eyes and tell me." Opening my soaking wet eyes fully, I quivered as I looked up at her. "I would never have. It's for some pony else who means a lot to a friend. She's in the exact same position as..." I raised my hoof to point at the patient. The nurse was quiet, before dropping a small cloth before me and kneeling down. Her voice remained stern, but I could sense a gentle nature behind it. "Dry your tears. I can see you're honest. This was wrong, but your heart was in the right place at least. Enough that what you say you were doing. I wouldn't be a nurse if I couldn't respect that to some degree. Even if I work for Red Eye, that doesn't mean I don't follow the same code that Dr. Weathervane taught us. He's pretty intense about that stuff. Look, I'd give you some, but we have none spare." Well, what? As I got up slowly, I could see the mare had seemingly fallen into a restless sleep, even with us two talking. She really was in a bad way. Why hadn't I seen that? "There might be some in the basement, but that's dangerous, you see." When the megaspells hit, it was flooded from a water line that came from the impact site. The water is long gone, but the radiation is intense down there. It would badly affect your lung if you were to try. But there is an old supply room that we've been unable to reach. Usually, Dr. Weathervane brings enough that we don't need to bother even considering going down. But if you really are willing to go to these lengths... I didn't even need to think. If anything, I now realized more what drove Brimstone Blitz. I had damaged my own innocent nature here. If I had to risk life and limb to get that medicine to make up for almost doing the wrong thing to attain my own goals, so be it. That is, what life and limb I had left. The nurse had taken me to a back door, letting me out. As I wandered around the hospital grounds to try and find this basement entrance, I began to feel the poisoned air doing its work again the moment the cleaner hospital environment ended. My throat was dry from the air around the crimson hill of Philadelphia the moment I stepped outside. Very hastily, I regretted not stashing away one of my rataways that Protégé had given to help me stay healthy. At least my shoulder, while aching terribly, still was mostly functional. My stomach, however, was tightening itself and growling. Shivers crawled up through my body from lack of sustenance or any form of proper nutrition. The last thing I had eaten was the apple stew given to me by Protégé. In my still recovering state, it just wasn't enough. If only I found fresh food in Radaway as much as I found ponies I left without knowing the names of. Very quickly, I wondered why my cutie mark talent was to be a good little slave and not one of finding mysteriously strange unicorn mares. Furthermore, while I was hardly looking, given my present situation, why was my luck in meeting mares who actually talked to me only finding those too old for me, already taken, or sick? Well, there was one, but she was a wasteland legend whom I'd never have a chance with in my entire life, no matter how simply awesome she was. I stopped briefly. I'd shoved those thoughts aside before, but they did keep coming back. I remembered Sundial's words about the mare he liked, Sky Dancer. Sure, I appreciated the look of a mare as much as the next buck, especially if they were actually the same size as me. But did I really think of little Pip like that? Was it just misplaced pining for the dream of being alongside a hero? I'd only seen her briefly and never even talked to her. No, not the time for those thoughts, I warned myself. Dangerous irradiated area ahead, Murky. Concentrate! All the same, they might have been confusing, but I could admit to somewhat enjoying the feeling of perhaps a little crush. Maybe it was just silly fantasy, but one way or the other, it gave me something nice to dream of to help keep my mind from feeling too guilty from my nearly horribly wrong thievery earlier. It was the small things that kept you going in this city. Brimstone found me spluttering and coughing through a bank of contaminated dust blown in from the nearby crater. Dropping on my side near him for a breather, I reflected that I should probably have asked for something to fight the radiation while inside, especially given where I was about to go. Unfortunately, I presumed they likely had strict orders. I looked up at the muscular form of Brimstone peering down at me.
You don't have it.
The words held a lot of potential for violent anger at my coming out empty-hooved. Perhaps it would be best he didn't know that I had turned down some. No, but I know where now. I pointed to a hoof toward the swing door that led to the basement. It was locked as well, but that wouldn't prove any real obstacle to Brim. I explained about the radiation, but, as I had guessed, he didn't care in the slightest. One slap with those Murky No. 7's head-sized hooves, and the basement lay open before us. A darkened and dusty hole in the ground, probably untouched since the war. Pre-war, irradiated, with a raider. Why didn't I ever get to go someplace nice? Not for the first time since we had descended was I beginning to realize how out of my depth I was. I was just a little slave who tried to run away, not some die-hard adventurer like Brimstone or Little Pip. Every ounce of me was fighting to keep my resolve strong, to stop me wanting to just turn and run. Protégé would understand, surely, if I turned up and just explained. Maybe he'd help out and get some for Glimmerlight somehow? I hated the fact that I caught myself wishing I could just go back to one of my old masters outside Philadelphia, with a lot less scary things and pain all the time. I could just barely see down here. Already the radiation was noticeable, as I felt my chest begin to burn. Each breath was labored, and I had to stop and cough every so often, much to Brimstone's annoyance. I'd enjoyed a brief period of relief thanks to what I stole from Artery and then the healing I'd received from Protégé, but this place was bringing it all back. The sick little slave buck dragging his hooves and coughing up blood had returned. Around us was little of note. Almost pitch-dark janitorial rooms littered each corridor. Supply cupboards proved to be filled with racks of musty books or boxes of washers. Large pipes creaked and groaned as we disturbed the environment around them. Or rather, as Brimstone disturbed the area. If I ever needed to feel like I was better at something than some pony else, I simply had to think of his complete lack of consideration for the term stealth.
Hey, Merc?
Yes? My voice trembled as my rough throat caught the words, leading me to splutter and grab a pipe to keep myself on my feet. Brimstone seemed unaffected thus far. Perhaps he just didn't show it.
Had a thought. If we need to gallop back and split up, we need a better password for the cell door, so I know it's you.
I was about to comment that a number of knocks had seemed to work, but then I was the moron who had gotten it wrong. So, what do you suggest?
Easy. The password is fuck.
Oh, not fair. Brim turned back to me. I could see him grinning in the darkness. I guessed he liked to use a bit of banter to help relieve times when you could cut the tension with an auto-axe.
Aye, that'll do. Now, you should go up front. You seem to be able to see better than I in the dark. These eyes don't work as well as they used to before that little scrooner with the flamethrower a few years back.
A little what? I mean, you sure?
Aye.
Was he grinning? What was the joke with simply saying I? Oh, wow, I was slow today. Sighing, I staggered up front, glad that at least Brimstone would be able to see if I were about to collapse. Perhaps he'd carry me back out again. Perhaps he'd just leave me here? The worry shaking me led to another foul cough. At least I wasn't vomiting blood yet. Each step I made was hardly without worry. My eyes adjusted well to see a vague outline of thin corridors and irregular doorways that hardly seemed shaped for ponies at all. I began to wonder if the designer had even thought of those who might have to access it during operation. Thick layers of dust were not helping my breathing one bit as I carefully edged around old tools and rusted objects that I couldn't even discern the original use of. My ears worked just fine, though, and I didn't like what they were hearing. Light shuffling and trotting. I froze on the spot, leaning down and hoping Brimstone would get the message as I closed my eyes and just listened. The sounds of something soft, something irregular and organic. Every so often I heard metallic noises, similar to what we were making by trotting around all this plumbing and broiler kit. The thick concrete ceiling kept all sound from above out. Whatever was moving was down here. My quivering became a fearful shake as I remembered the hellish zombie janitor thing in the dark. That howling, mutilated and rotten face inches from my own haunted my every thought. What I could hear was moving idly, dragging its hooves behind it, and moving aimlessly, just like that monster before. I whined, fighting the urge to flee. "Brim," I whispered, "I think there's a zombie."
Not surprising. It's contaminated down here. They live off that stuff. Just find a room. We're under the main building, so it should be nearby.
I really wished I could detect where that sound was from, but the ambience and thick walls were giving me no clues. Dust hung in the still air, while repaired plumbing squirted the occasional mist of steam into the corridors that blocked my vision. Of course, it also made everything look like it was some other shape. Now, if I could just stay quiet, we might find the medicine and get out before whatever was wandering these thin tunnels found us. A nice doorway, just close to me. That'd do to begin the search. Placing my front hooves on the door, I pushed. In my weakened state, the door felt heavier than I could even attempt with a slow push. Slamming forward, I shoved it open roughly, before a wall of dust exploded in my face out of the undisturbed space. It went in my mouth, in my eyes, and shocked me to a yelp and fall back. My throat began to tingle. The tickling rose, a painful building of pressure as I fought to keep the cough in. Unfortunately, the dust had done its damage. My throat was like sandpaper. I felt both lungs searing with the effort to breathe and making spasms as I tried to just inhale normally. I couldn't hold it in. Even with my hooves covering my mouth, the coughing went on for far too long. I fell, crying out between them as I felt my entire mid-torso light up with the pain I'd begun to forget from my illness. It wouldn't stop. Hacking and spluttering, I cried on the cold, dusty concrete floor as it felt like my lungs were about to erupt from my mouth. It took a good 10 seconds to die down, leaving me lying frail and weakened on the floor, scarcely able to breathe. Whatever it was, it heard me. A sickly howl of hunger and rage echoed through the basement as I heard rapidly moving hooves galloping. Brimstone leapt between me and the rough direction, a metal shard in his mouth ready. A ferocious crash boomed through the area as I saw the far oaken door shudder from a colossal impact. Even Brimstone seemed taken aback by whatever force was slamming on the door. I got to my hooves, leaning my hoof on a pipe, wincing in pain as my shoulder reminded me why I shouldn't be putting weight on it. The door was holding, but I could feel the impacts through it. It made a high-pitched shriek, and I saw a glowing haze emerge and fade from below the doorway.
For the glorious love of great fuck, will you shut the hell up in there and stop that endless fucking bullshittery?
The sounds ceased. Everything became deathly quiet as Brimstone and myself stared sideways at the second pony, who had approached us under the noise of the zombie ghoul pony thing attacking the door. My mouth dropped, and not just at the rather imaginative cursing. Another ghoul. If I could have screamed, I would have. A unicorn stallion, dressed in a torn and faded doctor's outfit. Underneath it was nothing but rot and sinew, with visibly moving muscles and surrounded by a sickening smell. From the looks of things, he was trying to keep his body covered by as much of his uniform as possible. He glanced to the door and slammed a hoof against it. A face bearing the scraggled remnants of what could have once been an impressive beard scowled with enough disgruntled fury that made me wince.
It's just me, you old cranky bastard! Now calm the fuck down and let me get back to sleep!
His voice put even my sickened one to shame in terms of roughness and rasping quality, but it held authority and poise beyond any I had met, even Protégé. As soon as he had heard the monster back off, he turned to us looking furious.
Follow me! If you want to live more than one more fucking day, you'll come right the fuck in here this fucking minute! Fuck's sake!